So yeah, resilience. There's so much to unpack with that, along with knowing your worth. And I could go on like a 2-hour rant, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet so we can really get more interactive with it. But I think I'm just going to essentially lay out my life and my experiences through basketball because I think it's kind of a prime representation of that self-discovery and understanding and learning your worth and also going through trials and tribulations and building up that resilience and understanding why it's important. So I'll start with when I started playing basketball, which was kind of late, I think age 12 or 13. And I'm really not going to talk about much to do with actual basketball and more on the aspect of what I learned through it. And when I started playing basketball, it was really the first time that I realized that I was a woman. And I know you guys were like, okay, well, that makes no sense. Like, you've known you were a girl your whole life, right? But it was the first time I actually realized that the fact that I was a woman was going to determine how others would treat me and how others would view me. So that was the first time I actually realized that there was a discrepancy between, you know, your gender, right? So, I mean, I feel like when you grow up and children in general have so much love in them, so much light, and all of the, you know, unconscious biases and judgments and stuff, these are all learned behaviors, right? So when you're younger, you don't really realize that you're different than other people, right? These are things that you learn as you grow up. So that's something that I learned through basketball because when I started playing, I started realizing that there was a difference between the girls' side and the boys' side, right? Even in practices, I'm like, okay, well, why are the guys doing all these cool, fancy moves and I'm only allowed to do a crossover? Like, why is that different? And then once I started playing high school basketball, I'm like, okay, well, why are there so many more fans for the guys' side? And there's like 3 people in our games, like, and 2 of them are my parents, so technically just 1 person, right? So yeah, that's kind of when I realized that I was different and that if I wanted to be successful in my craft, I had to work 10 times harder than my male counterpart. And people always say that, but that was when I finally realized that that was the truth, right? So through that, I kind of learned what sexism was and that it was a thing and that it existed because that was something that I didn't really understand until I started playing basketball. And that was tough, right? And that was also the first time that I realized that I had been basing my self-worth off of where I was on society's scale, right? And how other people perceived me. So people would say like, oh, women's sports, like, they're not that great. And to me, I would feel like, no, we are amazing. Like, I feel confident, but I never really thought that I could reach a level that was higher than a guy or whatever. And it sucks to admit that, but there's so many of us who are low-key in the same boat because that's all we're taught, right? It's literally all we're taught from the moment we start, when our trainers and our coaches kind of treat us with kid gloves. I don't know if you guys have experienced that in the past, but especially back in the day, like, that's kind of how it was. We were treated differently just because we were female athletes, and it was kind of thought that we couldn't do as much, essentially, right? So that's when I learned what sexism was, and I kind of had to work through that. And then once I got to university, so I went to the University of Windsor for 4 years, and then I transferred to the University of Ottawa to finish my last year. And my university experience in Windsor was not the best. I mean, I think I learned and I grew a ton. It just definitely was not what I was expecting and what I had hoped for. And part of the reason for that was when I got to university, it was the first time I realized that I was Black. And again, you guys are probably like, you've known this, it's very obvious, right? But it was the first time I actually realized that that was something that was going to tempt people to treat me differently, right? And that was the first time I actually saw that people were treating me differently because of that. Beforehand, it was probably still the same case, but I just, again, when you're young, you don't see that other people see you differently, right? You think that everyone is equal and everyone is the same and everyone loves everyone. The world is rainbows and sunshine. That's just the outlook that I had. So when I got to university, it kind of, the real world hit me, and I realized that I was going to be treated differently because of the color of my skin. And that, again, was through basketball. That was, you know, from my coach and from, you know, interactions that I had in the classroom. And I realized, like, man, there are going to be boundaries that I'm going to have to overcome that other people probably won't. And there's really nothing I can do, but I can't complain about it. Like, the only thing I can do is overcome it. And that's where the resiliency and the self-worth comes into play, because again, I realized that I could not limit myself because society already limits me so much, right? On society scale, I'm done here, right? We have the straight white male, which is at the top of the food chain essentially, and then it just kind of goes down, right? So I'm here in society's eyes, and I knew that I wanted to surpass that, right? There's a glass ceiling for me, and I knew that I had to break through that if I wanted to be successful. So that came with a lot of self-discovery. And I think when I finally overcame some of that was when I went to South Africa with Claire, and I actually realized what racism was and what I had been experiencing my whole life. Things that, again, I had learned to just block out because I thought it was normal. So I understood what microaggressions were. I understood that, you know, if someone makes an inappropriate comment, then it's not okay, and I shouldn't just ignore it, right? So the thing to realize with that is all of these outside life factors will affect you on the court. As much as people want to say that, you know, come game time, as soon as you walk into the gym, you leave all your baggage out the door and you'll pick it up when you come out. I've heard that from coaches all the time. And I agree. When you walk into the training facility, competition area, like, you need to be focused and ready for the game. But the way I see it is, if you ran a marathon the day of the game and then you went to go play the game, you probably wouldn't have a very good game because physically you'd be gassed. So the same thing is happening with your mental side. If you ran a mental marathon that day, if you had a really bad day, it's going to affect you on the court. You can't compartmentalize all these different aspects of your life because everything is interrelated. So as much as you want to say, like, oh man, I was so focused on that game and somehow I was off, I don't know why. Life factors are always going to affect you. So if you have some internal trauma, if you have some unresolved issues, it's so important when you're going through those growing phases to actually address them, because subconsciously they're affecting you on the court, they're affecting you in your craft, they're affecting you in the classroom. And it took me probably until my last year of university to realize that and to understand that life is going to affect your performance. As much as you want to say that you're the most resilient person in the world and nothing can faze me, I'm a baller, shot caller, like, life is there. You can't ignore it. You can't just leave it at the door and pick it up when you leave. So that's a brief overview of my life experiences, I guess, through basketball, and how that's kind of taught me the importance of understanding your self-worth and truly being resilient compared to what you typically hear of, like, just running that extra lap or whatever, touching the line, or, you know, pushing through the fourth quarter. It's more so about mental resiliency compared to the physical aspect, and everything's connected. Yeah, that's my spiel. I'll kind of open it up for any questions you guys have. And before I do that, I want to encourage you to really take this time to ask questions that are on your mind. They could be, even if it's unrelated. I'm a very open person, and I will tell you absolutely anything that you want to know. But that's another thing that I learned way too late. Third or fourth year university, I learned the importance of asking people questions and being vulnerable and, you know, learning through other people's experiences. So yeah, question time. That's a great question, because it took me so long to find the answer to that. And again, it was only really recently that I figured it out, because again, I thought that mental toughness and being resilient meant whenever something comes up, you just have to get over it, right? So as quickly as possible. So that was my thing. Something would happen and I'd just be like, okay, whatever, it's fine. I'm fine. Like I'm fine, right? Lying to myself essentially. And I felt fine for maybe a couple days, but then stuff started to build. So I think the way I tackled that was to sit in my feelings, like invite my feelings to tea, as I say, and just let it sit for a second. Be like, okay, why do I feel this way? What is this emotion? Why is it here? Why are you here? Have a conversation with it. You know what I mean? It sounds weird, but actually just allow yourself to process how you're feeling and then let it out. And the letting it out part is what is going to vary from person to person. Some people prefer to write how they feel and then burn it afterwards so that it's kind of like just, disappearing. Some people prefer to talk it out. That's what I do personally. I prefer to talk my feelings out with friends and with family. Some people just, like to do some self-reflection, but kind of to summarize, just actually process what's happening, because a lot of us think we just have to get over it. And I'm actually going to make a whole video on exactly that topic with my mom, because she just really wanted to talk about the coaching aspect and actually relating to the players and why it's important. So stay tuned for that. But for now, I'll kind of explain the good experiences and the bad experiences that I've had. I mean, it's, for me, I've had really great experiences up until university because my mom was my coach and she's also a Black woman. So she understands me and like my struggles and stuff. So I was really blessed in that sense. And Andy this past year was amazing. He was just so open, and I think he opened the floor to begin with. From the beginning, he said, you can ask me anything. And I feel coaches do that a lot, but I feel if you want your players to open up and be vulnerable with you and actually come to you with things that are bothering them, you first have to be vulnerable with them. And, I don't know, maybe explain to them a little bit about your life so they really know you as a person, and then they feel comfortable coming to you. And that's something that I was discussing with my mom, because we were talking about like, oh, you've got to be vulnerable and you got to have these deep conversations. And I was like, wait a second, like there is a line that you have to be sure that you never cross. And the only way to do that is to just literally be straight up with your players and ask them like because everyone has different boundaries, right? So ask them like, this is the type of relationship that we have. It has to be professional, but I still want to maintain a real relationship with you. I think real coaches are the type of people who are not necessarily like best friends with all their athletes, but at least, their athletes are people who, if you walk and see them down the street a couple of years down the road, that they'll be excited to see you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think literally just asking the question, like, what are your boundaries? Like, what would you feel comfortable talking about with me, and what would you not feel comfortable talking about? Like, I think that conversation is never ever had. So that's why no one ever really knows where the line is. In terms of, I guess, advice for coaches through my negative experiences, because the more recent things that happened kind of in my last year had to do with not so much the coach-athlete relationship, because it was a female team, because it was also a female coach, but it was more to do with race issues and not, how do I explain this? Essentially just doing research and understanding that all of your players are going to be coming from a different perspective. So it's really important to be sensitive to that, and to, like, watch out if you make any comments, and also acknowledge if you've made a mistake, own up to it and apologize, because it's, everyone wants to learn and grow from their mistakes, right? It's impossible that coaches aren't going to make mistakes. But that's another thing that I don't think coaches and athletes really discuss, is the cultural differences between each of the players, even on a religious aspect. Like, if you think, I think it's easier to explain respecting people's religions, right? Because there's some times where you have maybe somebody on the team needs to pray 5 times a day, right? But nobody knows that. And if you're on an away trip and, you know, that player needs somewhere to pray and she's never told any of her teammates or her coach that that's something that she needs to do, then it becomes very uncomfortable. So I think we need to kind of normalize talking about our true identities, like what's our religion, what is our cultural background, so that coaches actually have a fuller understanding of who they are and how they can help them be their best selves without, you know, having to hide the most important parts of themselves, essentially. So someone who's mentally tough is someone who, I mean, okay, every player is different. So it's not necessarily, you know, the player who's completely straight faced the whole time, like never animated. It's mistake response, I think, is the key when it comes to seeing who's mentally tough, because that second that you waste of when you miss a shot and you're like, oh man, is a second you could have been analyzing, like, okay, why did I miss that shot? Okay, cool, now I can fix for the next time, right? So it's not allowing your mistakes to affect your performance. And it's easy to think of it in the shooting aspect because it can be applied to pretty much everything else. So I mean, if someone who misses their first 4 threes and continues to shoot and is going to make that 5th one, it's a common example, but that is true mental toughness, because on your 5th 3, your coach is looking at you like, okay, you just missed 4. Your teammates are looking at you like, you just missed 4. But it's having confidence in your training and your skill and knowing that even if I miss this next one, I'm going to make the next one, right? So that can be applied to pretty much everything else in terms of when you get a turnover, if you miss a layup. So mistake response, I think, is the biggest key, even on defense, right? If you get beat, it's not switching off, or no, even being smart about it and being like, you know what, I don't have the physical capabilities to guard this person. I need to be smart, put my ego aside, and for the sake of the team and to win this game, we need to make a switch. That's also being mentally tough, is putting aside your ego. That literally instantly brings me to my decision to leave Windsor and transfer, because that was probably the biggest and hardest decision I've ever had to make. And it kind of exposed the fact that I didn't really have a line, right? I would always just tough everything out when sometimes it wasn't worth it. It wasn't healthy. And for 4 years, I had just been like, you know what, this is just part of university life. Like any negative experience that I would have, I would kind of just take it and put it in my back pocket and say, you know what, this is not, I'm going to deal with this later. And it got to a point where my pocket was like weighing me down and I could no longer walk. And it was still something that I was like, I can do it, right? I can still walk. It's fine. So I think if I had advice for younger athletes, and to answer that question, is you need to establish a line first and foremost of, is it worth it for me to do the work to overcome this? Yes or no? If it is, how many times am I willing to go through that? Because that was my issue, right? I would go through it, and I would go through the same exact problems and issues over and over and over again. And I never determined when it was time to stop, right? And I'd exhausted all the resources. I tried so many different things to try to help, but I didn't have a line. And I just thought that that was the only way. Quitting was never the answer. And I think the line should be between, you know, working through it and changing your environment and transitioning into something better. Because the word quit was the word that was preventing me from growing, because I thought that I was quitting and I had started something and I'm a quitter and I'm a traitor, right? But, and I'll share this with you, I don't know if it's really relevant, but the reason I left and the reason I finally decided to get over that hump and completely transition into something new was because I saw a post on Instagram that said, what was it? I screenshotted it. Something about if a flower doesn't bloom, change the soil that it's in, essentially. It's not the flower's fault, it's the soil. And that's basically what you need to decide. It's like, is it you that needs to grow, or is there something wrong with the soil, something that you can't change, right? You have to literally physically change your environment if you want to actually physically grow. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but basically find a line and then determine which side you want to be on. And it's not quitting, it's just growing and transitioning. Easy peasy, lemon squeeze. Growth for sure is the biggest one because it applies to absolutely everything. Life, basketball, relationships, friendships, teammates, coaches. It encompasses everything, right? And you need growth to be able to improve in all the other categories, right? I'll leave you with this. This is something that, again, it took me so long to learn, is that you do have a voice, right? And even if people don't hear it sometimes, you still have to keep using it. And that applies in basketball, right? If you're at the boys' basket or the boys aren't passing you the ball, you're allowed to say something. Like it's building up that confidence to speak your mind and not really caring about what others are going to think of you, right? And it's the same thing in the classroom. It's, people are always going to talk over you. This whole other topic, I'm not going to get into it, but reclaim your space. If you have something to say it. If someone cuts you off, you say, "Excuse me, sir, I was not finished speaking." And you say it, you say your point, because that's going to apply to all the other aspects, especially in basketball. It's just having that confidence and developing that confidence, because you're going to need it when you stop playing basketball and you enter into the real world. So practice it now. And with all the stuff that we're talking about, the girl power and everything, we need to understand that we can't hate on guys, hate on male athletes because they don't pass us the ball, hate on guys because, the patriarchy and whatever. We need to understand that everyone has their own unique experiences, and it's important to think back and say, okay, why am I being treated this way? Like, maybe he's going through something too, right? So it's not always approaching it in the sense of like, oh, guys suck. It's okay, we're all struggling, we're all trying to figure stuff out. Being more empathetic and understanding people's experiences, because it's going to help you so much more, and it's going to save you so much time, wasting your energy being angry and frustrated at the world and at the guys who are not passing the ball and being dumb. So yeah, just don't waste your energy being angry. Try to, be more understanding of others, and it's going to help you in the long run. Girl power.